should be available. And in the case of a refusal to disclose that information, it provides the procedures that should then be followed to then challenge that decision. And in the case that there has been an inordinate delay, it also has the provision for a body to monitor the promotion and protection and even disputes regarding that access to information. So we have somebody from the Ombudsman's office who is going to speak to us about the work that they do in terms of overseeing the implementation of this access to information. So these laws are very critical because they help us know what our rights are and what the state's obligations are with regard to access to information. So we've talked about the constitutional guarantee is in the Constitution, Article 35. And one thing that we also need to pay attention to is that the Constitution also provides that there are certain limits to certain rights or freedoms. And unless the Constitution specifically mentions those limits, then those rights are guaranteed. So, according to Article 24 of the Constitution, the right of access to information can only be limited in cases where a law has provided that that right can be limited, and that law should provide that limitation in a very clearly, should set it out very clearly and make sure that that provision is narrow in definition. It can be very broad and say we are going to, there'll be exceptions to disclosure on this large area called national security. If it's national security, at least you have seen you will see in the law, it breaks it down. National security refers to number 1, 2, 3, 4. It can't be very broad. And then it also, that limitation has to be very necessary and proportionate. Necessary for meeting certain objectives. Is it every objective? No. It has to be certain objectives. And again, the Constitution clearly lays out those particular objectives. They are the rights and reputations of others, national security, public order, public health, and public morals. So until or unless the law that we have is very clear about these particular issues, then it can be challenged in court. We have seen many of our brothers and sisters in the public interest litigation field challenging issues because they don't fall under these limitations which are provided for under the Constitution. So let's move on. Now we've talked about what it is, where it's provided for so that it can be given effect. Now we want to talk about why it is important. The access to information right plays a very important role in enhancing democracy. Because unless you know, if you want to hold government to account, you need information to be able to then hold it to account or to even ask about it. For example, the commitments we've been talking about today morning, we have been able to find them in the manifesto. So that information is available to us. We can only hold it to account on the basis of that information. So a lot of the information that the public needs relating to issues of importance, public interest, whether it's elections, whether it's issues to do with pandemics, or information on issues to do with corruption, all this is information which is important for helping the public to hold the government accountable. And they cannot do that unless they have that right of access to information. The other thing is about helping citizens participate effectively in democracy. And a lot of you who are involved in supporting public participation activities know how crucial it is for all the people involved in those exercises to have access to information. If we're talking about a road being developed, we don't have the budget. We do not have information about how it's going to affect the communities living there, an environmental impact assessment, then how are we going to contribute towards those discussions? And yet a lot of the challenges that have been raised by citizens regarding public participation is that they don't have access to information. So how can they effectively participate unless they have access to information? The other role that it plays is that it helps people to access other social and economic rights. A friend of ours who works in the Ministry of Health was telling us the story about how they had been sent to Turkana. Just recently, they completed an activity where they are collecting data about how COVID affected communities around the country. But she was very surprised because they went to an area which has hardly seen any development. In that place, water is a rarity. In fact, as they were going, the people were telling them, when you come back, please come with water, drinking water. She said education, the highest level of education was ECD. So anyway, the person who has been educated to the highest level has actually just passed ECD level. But yet, year after year, every 5 years, they elect somebody as their, governor, MCA, and you know what. But it has never really occurred to them that unless you are able, that how important it is to hold this person to account for some of those services that are not available. They just go and vote diligently and loyally. But unless we have information which we can use to hold to account those duty bearers on some of our social and economic rights, then it is impossible to actually play that role of keeping government and other duty bearers accountable. Then the other thing, DK today morning talked quite a lot about the way in which media, journalists, and human rights defenders are constantly victims of violence, and yet they're doing their work, which is accessing information so that they can provide information of public interest to the citizens. Without this right being recognized, then it's very difficult for us to hold government and duty bearers accountable and in ensuring the protection of fundamental rights and freedoms. I don't know if maybe somebody might be talking about data protection and how important it is that you have access to information that the government holds about you regarding yourself so that you can correct that information in case it is not correct. So quickly, I also want to talk about specifically the role of the media, because they play a very important part as a pillar of democracy in promoting access to information. They, at least without media, a lot of the stories that we get and are able to then begin mobilizing around would not be available. So their role in ensuring access to reliable information on vital issues is very key. And so whenever you talk about access to information, usually you think about those who are tasked with accessing information on our behalf, whether it's the media, whether it's human rights defenders, and other civil society actors. Sometimes it's lawyers and even judges. But all these play a very critical role in accessing information. And yes, of course, they enhance transparency and accountability of those who are in power. They speak truth to power. And because they play this very important role, then it means that they are also entitled to very important legal protection. Without that protection, then we can say that access to information freedom would be a dream. So we had also again today morning that a lot of times it is the journalists, the media, HRDs, and civil society are looked at as enemies, as people who want to bring those in power to disrepute. And yet it has been recognized by a joint declaration of the UN Special Rapporteur, especially those who deal with the freedom of expression in different regions around the world and even the UN. In a joint declaration on fake news, disinformation, and propaganda in 2017, they said that the human right to impart information and ideas is not limited to correct statements. And the right extends also to protect information that may shock, offend, and disturb. Most of the time, it is felt that the information that I should be able to give you should be information that will not offend any particular individual or disturb members of the public. However, it has been held that that right is not restricted just because it may be offensive or shocking. And so you use